And I'm going to move on to the next question. So, students may have, and we hinted at this already, students may have some disabilities that show up very differently online. What might that look like, and what might, practitioners see as they make this transition? What are some examples that, you can think of with this?
Well, if you think of our students with autism, the social interactions that may create behaviors that are unexpected, they may have a limited amount of those social interactions. They may have siblings, but the family dynamic is different than in a large classroom with 25 students. So their behaviors could possibly look very different. And they could be able to focus more on their academics, and really that their reading skills could improve at a faster rate than what you've seen in the past, or their math skills could do the same.
I think one of the most challenging disabilities that students have that we have to support is EBD, which can show up, like we said, as a lack of engagement, but it can also show up as a student who emails you constantly. So you may get 10 emails a day from them, or you may, we have Skype for Business, so they may be IMing you or texting you. So something to be aware of. And also I think you kind of develop this where you're like actually kind of excited about that though. It's much harder when a student is unengaged than when they're overly engaged. And you begin to really be grateful when a student and even their parents are overly engaged in the process.
Stephanie, I think you were going to answer.
Yep. And I have to agree with you too, Christy. You do see a lot with those EBD kids, especially those gamers, just reminding them they need to use their school chat, not their game chat, that they are at school. So some of those things that you see in an online environment where you may have kids who are used to being online and chatting online and doing those gaming things, or like we've said earlier, you may have those kids who have never been online in their lives and have no idea how to do this. And they hit the caps button, which we all know is yelling, but they didn't do it because they're yelling. They did it because that's just easier to type that way. So, I mean, just, like I said, give them a little bit of slack, give yourself a little bit of slack. You're all learning, it's new. You'll get it, there will be difficulties. The behaviors online do show up quite differently. A lot of times with those EBD kids, we start to get to see some of those, how brilliant they are, because those kids who are whispering under their breath next to them aren't bugging them anymore. Mm-hmm. So it's amazing to see the difference in the online environment, how some of those behaviors develop or don't develop.
That's really encouraging, I think, right? And I think, the hope is that people just aren't feeling so under pressure as they start delivering distance learning, that they can actually appreciate and be open to seeing some of those differences, right? Question 5. So we've had a lot of questions about service minutes. And so is there anything that you could provide by way of advice about service minutes? And I think, Christy, you had some insight on this, so I'll call you into the conversation first. How about?
Sure. Well, as we were planning this, I quickly realized I don't have as much experience as everybody else because I teach 9 through 12. So service minutes could look like what we put online for them to do, for sure. That's part of the service minutes, but it could also be meeting and, going to meetings with them. But for younger kids, we were also talking about, this might look a little different. I'll have to have somebody else talk about that and what like one-on-one time would look like. We did talk about the fact though that it can look, that the time can be the same. Mm-hmm. Meeting with a student one-on-one for 20 minutes a day with what you were doing a couple weeks ago, then you can continue to do that now. The time is still there to do that. It's just a matter of being organized. And again, I can't stress this enough, working with your families to make that happen. But But yeah, I'm going to let everybody else talk about the other kinds of service minutes.
Yeah, it's something that just popped into my thoughts, where especially for the littles who have parents who may be working and their children might have to be at daycare, depending on what that system or situation looks like for those families, you're not going to want to maybe do one-on-one at 7 o'clock at night with your student. So I understand that there's going to be some differences in how that is vended, and that's working with families, right? And meeting them where they're at and finding what works at the time. But if the student is available during your workday and you can connect with them, service minutes don't look that different from my perspective, having come recently from brick and mortar on to online. I would say that, you know, it's the scheduling part that's the trickiest. So being organized with your calendar and trying to fit everything in, but then having your boundaries and say, you know, our teachers work from this time to this time, and this is when we'll be able to provide those service minutes. How can we make it work?
Yeah, and that's a tricky balance too. You know, we've already heard from people as they're planning that there's a wide variety of ways that this is rolling out in the real world. So like some districts have said like, look, we're expecting you to put in an 8-hour day, like in 24 hours, like you do you and decide what works for you. Other people are saying you're going to actually show up physically to our building from 7:30 until 3:30, right? So there's a wide variety of ways that this is going to look, but it sounds like, you know, flexibility might be, you know, better for families if that's possible in the district. I want to also kind of pivot into the question about, you know, parent involvement is what we've been talking about here. And I know that part of this is going to be data collection, right? So what have you found like success? How have you found success in engaging parents around the data collection pieces that you need to do? And I've stumped the panel.
Well, one of the things that I do, I work mostly with high school, so a lot of the academic stuff is delivered through the general education curriculum, but when we work on transition pieces, that kind of thing, I provide tools where they can respond, whether it's a Google form or another online assessment where their responses would be recorded. And then that way I can provide that to the parent if the student needs assistance. And it doesn't necessarily need to be synchronous between me, the parent, and the student. So maybe I want them to read something, a passage for a timed reading. The parent can do the timer and let me know where the student finished at 2 minutes and put that into a Google form. If we're taking a career interest inventory, provide a Google form where they can put their responses, or provide them with an assessment that's going to automatically report it to me, so the parents don't need to even be involved.
Thanks for that.
Oh,
Sorry, go ahead, Christy.
I just want to say that I have to add that this is one of the great parts about working online is data collection, because we do use so many programs. For example, we use Reading Plus in our school, which captures all that data for us. We don't have to sit and, you know, grade things or look at things. It gives it to us. So depending upon, you know, work with your administration, and depending upon what they decide on, that you might actually find this part a lot easier than what you're doing now.
It might be great if we could add into that resources document, like some of those tools that, you know, people might find useful too, right? All right, I want to thank everybody in the panel. I think we're kind of running up against our half-hour recording, or, you know, our recording limit here. So thanks very much. And I really appreciate you being here and really stepping up to support everybody in this, unique circumstance that we find ourselves in. And I think at least some of you have volunteered to do peer-to-peer types of mentoring and workshops as well. So really appreciate all the help that you've given the teachers in Minnesota. Thanks very much.